all for at least enjoying Sean's presentation for an hour there. That was supposed to be my time. I had the time wrong, sorry. I am John Jansen, been planner for a long time. Used to work in Davis County. I was there for 3 years. That was my first job I liked. How's that? I was a private consultant before that, and actually did not enjoy that, Ray. Sorry. But that was the organization I was in. So anyhow, 3 years in Davis County. I was involved in the general plan process there, but mostly there that was pulling together the city plans, okay, the town plans, and then making some sense of all of that. Wasn't too much more to it than that, actually. So after that, I went to West Valley and was there when they incorporated in 1980, and was responsible for their first general plan, which took us a few years to get through that, because it was a mess what we were all doing, trying to figure out what we were all doing. Since then, I've done quite a few general plans, updates in West Valley, down in Loa, working on one in Heber. I saw somebody from Wasatch is here. How are you doing? And Mill Creek that just incorporated a couple years ago. I was managing that process too. Up in Weber County, North Ogden, Pleasant View, Box Elder, Brigham City. So I've done a few of these, okay? And what's interesting is that state law seems to change a lot all the time. And it starts hitting things in general plans that, you know, maybe we did okay before, but we need to improve on as a group. So what is a general plan? A vision. Vision for your community, right? For the county, right? Overall kind of a vision. Looking out. State law says at least 5 years. I don't think that's long enough. Most of the time they're 20. And the one I'm doing in Heber is 30. They want to go 30 years. Okay? So just think back for a minute. 30 years ago, I was a young man, red hair, red beard, and is the world different? Whew. Man, there's a lot of changes. So who knows what 30 years will bring us as we go along. So state law says you all are required to have a general plan. And I saw Johnny ask how many updated. Let's ask the other question. How many actually have them? Okay. You got a general plan.
Question for you.
Okay.
How long does your general plan have to be for? What time period?
How long? What time period?
Yeah.
So the minimum's 5. Okay. Which I've never actually seen one that's 5. I think the standard is 20. We'll talk a little bit about updating them as you go along. It's not this thing that you just do for that 20-year time period. You got this great vision, and then you're done. 20 years from now, you pick it up again, take a look at it, update it. Yeah, no, it's something you got to hang on to and do something with every few years, I think, as a minimum. But 20 is, I think, a common number. Okay. Practice with this. That works. Okay. Yeah. So everybody looked at their state law for counties every once in a while. You know, can't sleep one night. You just grab it and start reading up on things that they're telling us we ought to be doing. Okay. So you know, it's an advisory document, right? It's making suggestions. You might translate those to ordinances, programs, policies, but it's making suggestions, right? Thinking about the future that the community wants to achieve, okay? And I say community, as a county, do you still think of yourselves as communities? Yeah, okay? You're a place. You may be, you know, adding up parts, little cities and towns, whatever it might be. But you've got lots of unincorporated area. You have a vision that you need to create for that community. Usually the things that are looked at are trends, what's happening. If I look back that 30-year time period, we sure missed a lot of stuff, okay, that showed up. One of the big efforts in the planning process is coming up with what are the big issues that you have in your county. And I'm going to try and give you a couple ways to do that. I like just putting up a couple slides that make no sense with anything else now. But now I'm going to tell you how it makes sense to me. All right. So, are we preserving for a little snow in the future? Maybe for our grandson who loves pickles, you know? But we're preserving the future for some of the things that we really value, right? Trying to think about that future, what's important to us that we want to see somebody else have 30, 20 years from now. Okay, looking at your values, where we're headed, establishing priorities. When I was in West Valley, we were always trying every year to figure out what we're going to do the next year. Eventually, we started couching that in the general plan. What are those long-term things that we ought to be working on? And how do we get to those places? Okay, this idea of all these things that happen during the year are all kind of a short-range decision to make, but you can couch that in this long-range document. It's also really important to think of it as the first step in updating your zoning ordinance. Okay? Your zoning ordinance, you may be doing this as you go along, because I know you're all keeping up with state law changes. Let's see, Sean, how many did you have in that list today? But what about last year's and the year before that? You're all doing that anyway, right? But the plan may suggest different things that you ought to be doing. And if you just keep the ordinances the same way they've been, which is our tendency, then you don't reach that vision, okay? You don't make those changes that might be important to your community. Okay, for you all, this 1727A 403 is the state law that governs general plans for counties. By the by, I've done this a few times for cities also, through Luau, as Johnny mentioned, and other places. But there's 3 required topics. Anybody want to touch on those? The answers are up there, but you might just be thinking, what are the required topics we ought to have in our general plan? Or the answers are up there. Okay, land use, your future land use, where you're headed with the land use, your transportation system, okay, and housing. And then you all have a couple more, right? As I spent the time to actually read that little state law, which kept me awake for a short period of time. Resource management plans, last year you all did these. Does that ring a bell? We're all due, I think, last year at some point. Okay, nobody did that? Some places. Okay, you will want to look at that state law. That is almost as complicated as the new changes to the housing stuff. It really asks you to look at, it's going to be 30 different issues, okay? It's called a resource management plan. It's in that section. I've noticed you also have a radioactive materials plan. If you have storage sites in your county, you're supposed to have a plan for that. What are you going to do with that? Agricultural protection areas, I already saw you raise your hand. You got agriculture in your communities. Are there some of those you want to protect in the long run? Okay, those are all part of what you all have. You actually have more than the cities have that you need to be aware of. Coordination. I know Sean, you're going to talk about that this afternoon? Yes, you guys are. Okay. I'm going to just lightly touch on that. Do you think plans should do any kind of coordination? Let's see, the Wasatch guys. Do you think that Heber City should coordinate with the county at all? Okay, yeah, maybe. You know, I mean, to me, that's an obvious part of general plans. Taking a look at what's going on around you. Maybe within a county, it's how the cities fit together, how the transportation systems work, trails, ATVs, whatever it might be. Coordination role is being reinforced through state law. Okay. So for land use, looking at future land use, state does ask us now to take a look at the state-generated population projections, which are translated down to you all. Okay. You can get those from your AOG or your MPO, depending on where you're from. And if I throw out acronyms, you go, huh? Just ask, okay? AOG, how about that one? There we go. Okay. And MPO, for those along the Wasatch Front? Okay, Metropolitan Planning Organization. They also have the employment ones. Those are going to be refined some, I think, so they're easier to get. But it makes sense when you're looking at land use, what kind of population growth we're going to see, what kind of jobs might we hope to get. And maybe you want to try and get more. Transportation. This year they added some information about transit. Just thinking about that for a moment. Anybody along the Wasatch Front who has I like this term, fixed guideway. What's that? Tracks. Yeah, front runner, okay? If you've got one of those, they're actually asking you to look at the land use relationship to those facilities, okay? And I think that might go as far someday as bus rapid transit too, okay? But right now it's fixed guideways, which can be, in a sense, a bus rapid transit if it has its own separate lane. Detailed housing. Housing, let's see, those are the counties along the Wasatch Front for a moment. Raise your hands. Okay. We don't have a housing crisis, right? Let's see, wait a minute. Grand County. There's nobody here from Grand, right? Okay. They don't have one either. Washington, you don't have a housing crisis. Prices aren't going up. Nothing's happening. Anyway, legislature decided we're going to get into that. And we're going to make something that we've been requiring have a little bit more teeth. Okay? MIHP, how about that acronym? Who said that? Okay. You guys both said that? Just like that? It sounds like moderate income housing. Okay, that's good. Moderate income housing plan. So we've all been required, anybody over, any county over 5,000 population? Most, some, okay. If you got over 5,000, you've been required to have a moderate income housing plan. Didn't say it needed to be part of the general plan, but it does say that now. And the moderate income housing plan is looking at the kind of incomes in your county versus housing prices, okay, and rents. All right, and trying to see if people can afford to live there. Potentially, people that don't have as much income as others. County employees probably in that group, okay? I know I was. So anyhow, so that's now an important part of the plan, and the teeth part that was not there before is that there's a fund at the state called the Transportation, TIF, what is that? Coming up with
I think it's investment.
But that's not a Transportation Investment Fund. That's yes, thank you. If you don't have that, and this has to be an approved plan and strategies, you don't get to access those funds. So there really is a big difference. In the past, if you didn't have that plan, And I'm not sure who cared. Maybe the state did, but at this point, they're saying, we're going to make sure you have that plan if you want some transportation funding. Okay? So, those are the three biggies. The process you go through ought to reveal to you a lot of other issues that you need to deal with. So you can have chapters in your plan that address all those big issues. Okay? I'm going to try and talk a little bit about that for a minute. And this is Heber, by the by, which I'm involved in it right at the moment. One of the ways that we're trying to come up with what are the big issues is by looking at the values that the community has. So, communities value lots of different things. Every place you go, it's going to be a little bit different. But these questions on the right are good generic questions to get at some of those values. You get different answers in different communities. But here, in Heber, as we asked all of those, we ended up with some good answers. Some of them that need some more work. Okay? Like, okay. What do you love the most about Heber? Small town feel, rural feel. What does that mean? But that's the answer everybody gave, all right? So this is one step in the process, right? But stuff like that, you got to get into, you got to dive into deeper to actually accomplish something. Because you know, you can have a goal there. Let's keep our small town feel. And if you don't have anything to reinforce that, there's nothing there that's going to happen. It's a growth. Yep.
So how can you maintain the small town feel that those people answered today, knowing it's going to double in size in the next 20 years?
Okay, so that is a really good planning question. I'm going to go into that a little more in a minute, but the point really for me is that's what they want to do. They want to somehow hang on to some features, some way of looking at life that makes them still feel like they're in a small town. Okay, so I'm going to give you a somewhat obvious answer for me so far, but we haven't gotten much further than this, okay, which is if we just subdivide the heck out of everything, is that going to give us the small town feel eventually? I mean, Heber right now is a fairly concentrated community, a couple of outliers there, but there's lots of space between the communities in the county. Maybe that's one thing. How do we maintain those spaces between? Maybe the next is, how do we keep some open space? Maybe we have to go to a clustering philosophy for the subdivisions. I was surprised on my field trip through Heber, which, you know, I've been on Main Street a million times, but not really driven around, but now doing a general plan there, you got to get out and about. Well, the new subdivisions, they could be here, there, or anywhere. A lot of them, okay? They're just regular, you know, suburbia, Mill Creek, West Valley, West Jordan, wherever you want to say. You know, it just doesn't, when you drive through them, you go, huh? This doesn't feel like Heber, at least at one in my mind. Okay. So, are there things you could do? Yes. Will they be successful? I won't know. Okay. All right. So, some good questions. Trying to get at the big issues. There's a bigger list than this, by the by. But I think getting at those big issues is really important. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, when you were gathering these values, was it like open house, survey, what?
About all of the above.
At this, so do you feel like you got a pretty good representation of Heber City as a whole?
Yeah. I'm going to jump, you're jumping ahead for me, okay? I'm going to just talk a little bit more about that in the visioning process. So I've just got really three examples. One's the Heber one, and one's in Magna that we did quite a while back. I don't have a county plan, I'm sorry. Didn't keep that one from 38 years ago. In Davis County. In Magna, what do? This is just a focused plan on a particular area, okay? Their Main Street, their old Main Street. So we had open houses where we tried to get at what people thought about Main Street, what they liked about it, what they didn't like, what they were hoping it would be like in the long run. How do you handle the other half mile going to the other street? other Main Street in Magna. Issues like that we had open houses to try and talk about with people from the community and the business folks. We had a specialized meeting for the business folks, okay, just to talk, what do you see happening here? They had a bunch of dilapidated buildings, we even had those people in to talk about it. I don't recall in this one doing a survey, but generally speaking these days, surveys are pretty easy to do. SurveyMonkey works really well. There's a bunch of others out there. And the thing that's neat about the surveys is it's so automatic. You know, being in my career, you do these surveys, you get back a paper copy, and then everybody have to kind of figure out what somebody was writing there and put down the answers into some kind of compiled document. But these days, you can just easily do that with the surveys electronically. So, came up with this kind of a vision for Main Street, all right? From that process, go one step back, had the open houses, and then we had another open house with proposals, okay? Saying, here's where we think we're headed, here's what our vision is, let's talk about it, and let's comment and fix it up. So at least 2 open houses, one for gathering information, deciding on your big issues, and then a second one for where you're headed, what are the proposals. I'll tell you, when I was in Brigham City, that first meeting, I had somebody come up to me and go, "You've already made your mind up. You know what you're going to do. You're just, wasting our time here." I'm going, no. We have tables for topics. We're just having input from you all. I don't know where we're headed yet. You're going to tell us. And I think that is not a process that everybody's used to, okay? Finding that in Hebrew also, just by the by. That kind of openness, I guess. Okay, so one vision there. Mill Creek. I live in Mill Creek, and I've never really done much with Mill Creek. In my career, it was a township. Anybody have townships still? Are they gone now? Pretty much. I think there's one in Beaver County still, right? Yeah. Anyhow, it's too busy in other pursuits of life to do anything in my own neck of the woods. But after I retired from West Valley, I became a planning commissioner on the township and realized that we really did not have a general plan that met state law. I could probably argue that general plans for townships not even mentioned in state law, but nevertheless, we ended up doing a general plan right off the bat as soon as we incorporated. Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through this little process. If you get a chance to take a look at that one, I think it's really somewhat of a ground-up philosophy, and hopefully a kind of thing that makes sense to everybody. So, foundation, fancy word for getting out and meeting the public and talking to the public. Yes, we did lots of surveys. We had open houses. We went to events. Mill Creek has every Friday night a what's called a venture out activity in parks all over the city, and they rotate from place to place. And so we asked those values questions as a booth, a table at those events, okay? We spent the time, mostly because of the mayor and council, that they wanted to spend the time because they had never done that before, all right? They never really reached out to their population and said, let's figure this out. Let's figure out where we're headed. Okay, then, visioning. Came up with some statements about where we were headed, the topics that made sense to us. We actually, in our general plan, use vision statements for the chapters, which are covering things like housing, transportation, land use, but it's also covering recreation, culture, a lot of different things. So vision statements for each of the chapters, as opposed to the traditional titles of housing, transportation, land use. Okay? So those, we went to open houses and workshops on those, aired them. This one talks mostly about the trade-offs. We do this, what happens here? We do that, something else happens. And we eventually got to the point where we made choices on where we wanted to head as a community. Aired the plan for quite a while, about 6 months actually, and then went to the Planning Commission and eventually council hearings. So, this one is just meant to, well, I was going to talk a little bit more about Heber for a second. So, we're doing the visioning process in Heber, and this one is a different one. We're heard of the Envision Utah philosophy, okay, where they do this, what they call CHIP exercise. So you have people come to open house type meetings, right? And you have a nice big map of the city, the county, whatever it might be, and you create these land use chips, pieces of paper. This is like Monopoly on steroids, I think. Create these land use chips and say, where should these things go? Okay, and you'll have something that has, housing choices, that has commercial uses, that has manufacturing or industrial, probably / industrial, if we go back to the last presentation. Those kinds of chips, but where does that stuff belong in our community, okay? And they go through this process. You can get at a lot of good information that way, and certainly you're building your future land use map. All right, now Heber chose to go to areas beyond their current boundaries, okay, areas that might someday annex into their community. I'm not sure the county folks like that, but nevertheless, it's just, maybe the right way to do it if you think those folks are coming in. Might not be. There's probably a debate on that. But nevertheless, this is meant to reflect the chip exercise, okay? So you can see a little menu there of different kinds of chips that they actually cut out, and everybody just plays with those at the table. So, jump back a little bit. Okay, I just was trying to sort of get the flow here of, got some nice sketchy, 30,000 foot level plan ideas, translate to something more on the ground, and then I'm throwing in the ordinance updates. I do think in all plans, this and this are really important, okay? That you set the goals based on those important topics, and then you create strategies that you're actually going to try and implement, all right? So I hear you maybe talked about this already a little bit, this housing component. Again, for any county over 5,000, every city over 5,000 in the state, now all required to go through this list, or maybe your own list at the bottom there, and come up with at least 3 strategies that you are going to work on. These are really interesting, I think, actually. Zoning for higher densities. That was bound to be on there. That may be a tough one. Maybe you don't want to go with that. Fixing up some older homes. Fixing up some infrastructure. As a county, providing subsidies to try and help with the housing issues. And here's an interesting one that I didn't really notice right off the bat. Let's see. Here you go. Look at that. Provide mortgage assistance to your employees. Okay, just something to think about, but it's on the list, which is an interesting idea.
Does that mean monetary or direct?
It's probably not really defined that well. Now, you might be just providing technical assistance. I mean, there's one here that is just technical assistance. Why would you? Is that really getting anywhere? I don't know, but that's on the list. So, I mean, I like to think of that one as maybe you're helping with a down payment assistance program. I don't know what that might be. It'd be up to the county to decide if they even want to try and get into that. If you have the fixed guideway, if you got the tracks, this is what they ask you to actually get into. Providing for mixed use in near stations, somewhere along tracks. And then looking at your parking standards in those areas too, which is an interesting issue because most of us have these fairly generic parking standards throughout our communities, throughout the counties. And maybe those don't make sense when you're up near transit. Maybe you don't need quite as much parking. So that's one thing about some kind of incentive program, maybe reducing impact fees. How many have impact fees in the county? A couple. Okay, not many. Partnering, as much partnering as you can do with some folks that might help you build some more affordable housing in your community. A lot of choices there. You need to choose 3 or have 3 on your own. And then by December 1st, there's a report that, I don't know, did Meg left? Did Meg talk about this report at all? So she's very much involved in trying to get this reporting mechanism simplified so that it's not some huge burden to us all. It's due by December 1st, okay? And basically, it's going to be something that talks about those 3 strategies, okay? Yeah.
So on the population requirement, do I have to include the population in my towns? Or can I remove that and just say my county population, because I can only affect what my county does, not what the towns do, right?
Oh, but there's that coordination goal.
Sure.
Okay. The way I read that was it's the county as a whole. Someone else can take another look and see, but
Because
that's,
I know, like we're a pretty small county, Juab County, but Nephi has their own plan, and we'll have our own plan.
Yep.
And obviously there'll be some differences there, but our focus is a little different than what theirs is.
Yeah, and I get that. Again, I would come back to the coordination issue, but as far as I can tell, when I read that, it just said the population of the county.
I was just looking at the summary that Meg had done with the League of Cities and Towns. It says population of unincorporated counties.
Oh, unincorporated. So that may get you all out of a lot of this.
Sure.
Just unincorporated, okay. I missed that. That's good, thanks. So, if you don't have 5,000, you don't have to do this, all right? That's the simple answer.
So I think you still have to have this to get grants through CIP and some others.
You may have to for CIB. Let's just think about this for a minute on a bigger scale, all right? Does it make sense for you to think about the housing in your county? Yes. All right, so I hope you'll have a chapter in your general plan that covers housing. That's required anyway. And just thinking about the affordability issues. Certainly, if you're not along the Wasatch Front or Washington Moab or Wasatch Back, I guess, maybe there aren't as much issues-wise for you in the housing realm, but maybe there are. Maybe how do you get some housing for the workforce? How do you do that kind of stuff? So, it's an important thing whether you got to do it or not. Okay, enough of that. Planning commissioners? Anybody here, planning commissioner? Couple? Ray, where are you, planning commissioner?
Jay's talk. Jordan L.
Jordan now? Oh. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. So, what's important here is it's your role as a planning commission to recommend a plan to the county commission, county council, depending on where you are. So that's really your job, right? I mean, it's planning at its finest, right? Doing your general plan. Some communities don't have much staff, counties don't have much staff. Maybe you break that up in some way where the planning commissioners actually start having a role and responsibility for engaging the community. When I was in Pleasant View, moonlighting from West Valley, that's the way we did their general plans, okay? I did not have the time to go up there and do all kinds of stuff. It was just a little short thing every once in a while on an evening. But we got the planning commission members to kind of break up into twos, I think it was, and they sometimes held a meeting, an open house on the housing topic or the transportation topic or whatever it might be. And eventually we pulled together a plan that way ourselves. yes, I did help write it up, but I didn't really do much of the work, okay? But that's what can happen now, and just about everybody can do this social media stuff, that you can use that, use your friends to gather survey information. So you're required to have one public hearing, or you recommend up to the city council, or county commission. Just be thinking about that. I haven't seen too many general plans that go through in one hearing. So you may have some controversy, and you're going to give that some time to wade through that process. But you make a recommendation on up there. The plan's pretty important, I think, as a document just for all these kinds of things where you're using your plan. And I like to think about this too. Have your different departments involved. It makes sense to have the public works guys involved in the transportation part of the plan. Okay? If you have a housing authority, would you give them a call to come talk about housing issues in your plan? Standard operating procedures, maybe those need to change. Maybe there's something different that plan suggests. And certainly, at least from my way of thinking, changes to the zoning ordinance are likely, okay? Help you to set some priorities, and again, that long-range decision-making. Here, suggesting, every 5 years, where'd that go? Here we go. 5 years here. My experience when I was actually working for a public government was we did that every year or two, okay? Just coming back and looking at the main points and saying, is this still working? Is this still relevant to us? All right. And for this one, I actually think the most important thing is that it's this active document. It's not the one that you stuck on the shelf and look at maybe every 5 years. It is something that with your decisions that you're making, recommendations with the planning commission, decisions at the commission, we ought to be using that in our staff reports and in our thought process. What else do the citizens actually have to take a look at? Yeah, right.
Did you find often that when you were updating the zoning documents, you would update the general plan concurrently? Or did you just wait for a 2-year clean it up process?
My biggest experience with that was in West Valley, and here's what we did. We saw a problem in the code, we fixed it. Okay, I know that sounds just crazy, right? We said, this piece isn't really working, let's do something and change it. Whether that changed the general plan or not, that's another question to me. But the zoning ordinance, to me, then I'll talk about that a little bit with the conditional use discussion this afternoon, but it should be an active document too. Unfortunately, what I've seen is that a lot of times they aren't, okay? We did this code 30 years ago, and it's the same thing that you had 30 years ago. Times change. Things don't work. Is it a hard job to change your ordinance as you're going along? It's an easier job than trying to overhaul the whole thing, okay? It's much easier to do incremental changes, I think. And that was our philosophy, is let's do incremental things, fix stuff that's wrong. And honestly, anybody here from Sully County? Okay, anybody willing to admit they're here from Sully County? Okay, I'm gonna say this. They didn't like to do it at all, okay? They didn't like to change their ordinance at all. In Mill Creek, we had the exact same ordinance as Magna had, okay? When I was in my planning commission role there, I made little lists at the end of the meeting of things that just didn't make sense to me. And I'd send them to staff and they never did anything. But they had a very difficult situation, right? Where they had to go to 7 townships with all these changes. They had to go to community councils before that. and then to the planning commissions, and then to the county commission, which eventually became council. But they just didn't like to do it. So they just left it the same. So stuff that we saw in West Valley in 1980 was still there, and when that been 2010 when I actually was on the planning commission. Anyway, I'm an advocate for incremental if you didn't get that. See a problem, fix it. Can't you run for president on that philosophy? Anybody remember that guy? Anyway, okay. So, citizens, they just, what else do they have to look at that says where you're headed and what you're trying to do, okay? It's really important to them. And then the last piece there, do we all build that vision for the community, for the county? Who actually does a lot of the building in our community? Developers, right? Yeah, so they need to seize a hold of that, and we're hopefully giving them the right guidance to do what we hope will achieve our vision. Okay, a little bit about, what's my timing?
I'm getting it.
Okay, good. That's probably, I should have said, that's a really good segue, right? Because I just want to talk about ordinances for a minute. You go through this planning process, you come up with new goals, you got new strategies, you got new values. It ought to result in changes to your ordinances. There ought to be some things you're trying to do different, right? So, having been in the planning commission role, which was fun to be on the other side of the table for a while, sometimes we just don't really have good zoning. It's not that helpful to us. We're always having rezones that show up that are crazy, contentious, or plans out of date, whatever it might be. Some changes with conditions start to show up. And we're not really thinking about what is that vision, what we're trying to achieve, and how we get there by these rezonings that happen. I'm just going to emphasize this. I'm going to assume that Meg did that somewhere. But 12, 13 years ago, state legislature started making a lot of changes to the Land Use and Development Management Act for counties and for cities. And we just have not caught up, okay? It's to me, a sad thing, because they do these laws, right, these changes, and then we just don't respond and update things. We just don't get to it, okay? And some of that responsibility is on the attorneys in the room, but some of that's on the planning folks in the room too, and the planning commissioners. Because planning commissions, that is one of your roles, is to update your zoning ordinance, change it when you see problems. Make those recommendations to your county commission. But there's a lot of them, okay? And I think it's not easy to get caught up, but that needs to be done. And the other thing that happens when you start doing those state law changes, it starts to kind of be a snowball to some extent, right? You make some changes here, you got to do some changes over there. You start looking at your zones again, and it just becomes a bigger process. Okay, most zoning ordinances have a little purpose section up front. Does that part still make sense? And I'm introducing here just these thoughts about places. What are we trying to do? What kind of a place are we trying to create? And I'm going to pick on Ray again. So what kind of a thought is that?
Well, they're essentially the reflection of the character of all your earlier questions.
Okay.
And it's really easy to get off course from your general plan if your zoning structure doesn't coincide with what your vision was for the different neighborhoods or the industrial area or whatever.
So I was looking for a little different answer, Ray, but that's a good one. These things here are what often shows up in different kinds of codes that are really pushing the place-making philosophy, which is often in a form-based code, but it doesn't really have to be. It can just be code that addresses these kinds of things. What does our place that we're building look like? And what do we want it to look like? You know, in Heber, does everything have to have sidewalks and street trees and street lights, or is there some other configuration that makes more sense? You know, those kinds of things are what you can talk about. The uses. I'll talk about this a little bit more this afternoon, but a lot of times we have in our ordinances these monster lists of uses that go on for 3, 4, 5 pages, nice table. And there's a lot of things in there that maybe don't make sense anymore. We were talking about this earlier, that you may have uses in the zone that you want to deny sometimes. It probably should not be in that zone, okay? Because, again, state laws changed on all that stuff. What, if you like that use over here, but you don't like it over there, but it's in the same zone, that's a problem with state law these days, okay? That use should not be there. So, there's a lot of things that you get to look at. Hearings and adoption, you know, of course, Planning Commission again has a role of recommending. The commission or council has that adoption role. Added just that searchable code because, man, that is nice to be able to find something as you go along. All right, just quickly on approaches. Some communities like to create incentives in their ordinances as opposed to just straight regulations. One of those may work better than others for you. Look at there, there's that incremental thing in there. Again, I just suggest to you, you've got a problem in there, figure out a way to fix it. Okay? It's no time like the present. Major changes really are looking at those use lists, make sure they're right. Let's see, if you still got egg candling in the list somewhere, you can probably drop that out. Okay?
Arcades and boarding houses is still there.
Okay, boarding houses, yeah. I think those are coming back, aren't they? I don't know. Yeah, so, you know, it's just one of these things that take a moment and go through and start thinking about, do you have the right uses in the right zones?
The big caution is sometimes it comes up as someone's made application, and at that point it's too late.
Okay, and that's what that last one is. See, you're doing it again, right?
Oh, am
Yeah, here we go. Okay, so there are other new codes out there. We already mentioned form-based. So, but down here, you do have a tool to work on your zoning ordinance, especially, that you can use. Anybody ever used a moratorium here, down in Washington?
Yeah, we're in one right now.
Okay, on what subject?
The term is called rural recreation grounds. It was set up to handle camping and glamping and just outdoor recreation and
Good old glamping.
yeah.
Isn't that funny? Another new word in the last 30 years, right? Okay. But anyway, so you're addressing that one topic, and you've done a moratorium, temporary zoning regulation, or a pending ordinance.
Pending ordinance.
Okay. So if you haven't used one of those, it's a good tool. If you got something that you think really needs a lot of work in your zoning ordinance, let's just say you wanted to revise your whole conditional use ordinance. That might take a minute. That might be useful to have a little moratorium, stop the conditional uses from flowing in and out for a little while. You get to do that for 6 months. If someone has applied before you start that moratorium and they have paid their fees and they have what's called a complete application. Anybody want to define that for me for a minute? Complete application? Yep.
We just have that where they have an application for housing, because they want to put migrant workers in, I think 64 migrant workers in a, looks like a 12-bedroom complex. The permit wasn't completed, it was rejected.
Okay.
So they had to complete because a couple of small things, but they had to reapply, and they tried to use that as the saying, hey, we were applied to this because they changed the zoning rules
Okay.
in the interim of previous application, which wasn't complete. So
Mhm.
we weren't held to allow them to do it.
Yeah. So have you ever gone to a planning commission hearing where, let's see, there's a site plan in front of you with cars backing out onto the street, and you don't allow cars to back onto the street? I have. And I just said, do we allow that? And the answer was no. So to me, the application was not complete. It's really important to kind of get through that step of somebody has a responsibility to make sure the applications meet your code, meet your application requirements, and pay a fee. Okay, otherwise they shouldn't be on your planning commission meeting. And I can tell you, back in the early days in West Valley, we pretty much took anything that showed up, right? They had a nice napkin, maybe a lousy drawing, that was fun. But that has evolved over time because it's such a mess in the planning commission meetings just to have things that aren't complying with your codes, right? And or just, maybe they had 3 lines that they were supposed to fill out something and they didn't do that, and you don't have the information you need. So anyhow, complete applications, pretty important. This tool can be useful. 6 months is a short time to get through an ordinance change, all right? You gotta be really moving on it. Think about it. You have a drafting time, and then you have hearings with the planning commission, and a hearing with the commission. It's just not that good a process, but it gives you a window, right? To maybe think through something that's a problem. Okay, just a real quick, little power of the plan moment. Can the plan make changes to how you do business? The answer is yes, okay? And these ones are just from West Valley, but these are our fine streets that we still have a lot of. But new development is not happening that way anymore. This is the kind of standard that the city has installed into their ordinances, in public works too, with the streets. So our plan said we wanted better streetscapes, okay? Here's the thought on how we did that, and then those got translated into ordinances, and I think that's not a bad before and after one. So, here we go. Economic development. This area of the city, over near 215, a lot of manufacturing in there. The city wanted to have lots of jobs in the long run. Okay, there's a lot of vacant land in there too. We had a developer come in and wanted to change, I believe, that was, whoops, sorry, the wrong thing. Here we go. Come on. This parcel here, actually. Change that into a high-density multifamily development. So how many think that pretty much you could do a high-density multifamily development just about anywhere and it would be generally successful? Anybody agree? I think so generally, but it just seems like the demand for rental housing is pretty big everywhere. So yeah, that project would have worked. Sure would have. It was on Redwood Road for that matter. But we're saying we want jobs in that area. We want economic development. And so to us, that did not make any sense. They wanted to change the general plan to allow multifamily in that area that have been there for 150 years. We've never gotten any jobs other than janitorial and landscaping. So we denied that based on the plan. Okay. And again, that's that short run. Yeah, sure, that would work there. It's on River Road. But long run, what are we trying to do in that area? Trying to do something different. Okay. So I do think it can make a big difference. And there's some young guys playing with a plan in the back room somewhere. Any other questions? Any thoughts? Okay. All right. Well,
Ask questions?
yeah.
Let's see what I got. So, county general plans, I don't know if they're considered more complicated than city general plans or not, but
Yeah, more requirements.
in rural counties, and maybe you can answer this from your time when Davis County was a rural county, or Katie can chime in since they recently finished theirs. We have several communities kind of dispersed throughout the county that are not incorporated.
Okay.
But they all have a different idea of what their community is. So, a lot of them, some of them have created community plans that have been adopted into our general plan.
Okay.
Some of them want to do that. That can complicate a general plan, or you just have one general plan.
So, I don't know if everybody can hear this question, but this is Box Elder County on the north end, perhaps all the way around the lake. You have some communities that are incorporated and some that aren't. Doing a plan for that entire county, pretty daunting task, I think, actually, just because of the logistics, for one. But some of the communities have their own ideas of what should happen there. So I think this really does come back to this coordination role that you're going to discuss this afternoon. But I think outreach, having conversations with those different communities, how that fits into your plan, incorporating them, maybe right out would be good, but maybe you have some meetings to talk about some of the issues. So for me, I probably would go through a countywide value assessment kind of a thing, which we talked about a bit, and kind of see how the individual community ones fit into that, and maybe talk about bigger issues. I can't even remember the name of these towns that are out west there, but I looked at them on a map. You know, how do they interface with the rest of the county? I think that's really an interesting question, and one that maybe you should have some policies in your general plan how that works. But they are pretty much way out there. How's that?
We have some on the east side as well that are
Okay.
kind of create the same conundrums.
Okay.
You know, one of them is dead set on 5 acre zoning, and another one on 2 acre zoning, another on half acre zoning.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So on the east side near the Wasatch, I'd probably say that could be like an area that you could do as a different kind of a plan than that far west area. But because you got different issues as Wasatch Front grows that direction, front runner shows up, all those kinds of things, it starts to change how everybody's doing things. But having that conversation is part of that general plan process. And trying to be as inclusive as possible. Everybody needs to try and participate. And you could hold an open house in one of those towns. You can do some different things like that. But it is a bigger task. Davis County was, in my opinion, easy, okay, because they had a philosophy of development should happen in the cities, all right? And they reinforced that by not approving stuff. We said you got to go to the city first. The city wants you, great, and most of the time that's what happened. If they don't, then we'll talk to you, but we prefer you to be in the city. They wanted a different role for the county, more of a regional coordinating role than acting like a municipal government. So that was an easy plan in my mind. In a day when things were a little simpler also. So, okay, other thoughts, questions? All right, thank you all.
And with that, how many of you are absolutely confident that you're keeping up with your general plan? And so again, you know, Meg talked about, you've got planning commissions, you've got the